Hey guys, I'm going to help you out with Lesson 8's homework. And for number 1, we're going to use the area model to represent 220 hundredths and complete the number sentence. So first, in order to represent 220 hundredths, I need to know how many holes and how many hundredths that is. So I'm going to break it down, and 100 hundredths would be equivalent to a hole, and I can actually pull out 2 of those with 20 hundredths left over, which is the same thing as 2 tenths. So that means I need to color in 2 whole blocks, and then either 20 hundredths or 2 tenths. So 1, 2, to represent 220 hundredths. Well, the question asked me how many tenths it is. Well, each of those holes is 10 tenths, and I have 2 over here, so that's 22 tenths. And then it's actually 2 whole ones with 2 tenths left over, which as a decimal would be 2.2. And on part B it says, in the space below, explain how you determined your answer to part A. So what we did was we broke down 220 hundredths into holes, and then we basically use the area model to graph our tenths. So you can write whatever you need to explain what you did, but I'm writing this. So I broke 220 hundredths apart into holes. Then I shaded in the tenths, or in the area model. To find how many tenths. There we go. Okay, on number 2, it says draw place value disk to represent the following decomposition. So we're going to take 3 ones, and we want to know how many tenths that is. So to represent that, I'm going to do three dots, or you could do discs, in the ones place. And each one of these, if I were to break it down into tenths, each hole is the same thing as 10 tenths. So this one I'm going to break down into 10. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to break this one down into 10. And I'm going to break this one down into 10. And when I do that, I see that I have 10, 20, 30 tenths is the same thing as 3 ones. Now it's asking us to do the same thing with 3 tenths. So I'm going to draw 3 tenths. 1, 2, 3. And when I move one place over, each one of these is going to break into 10 hundredths. And so the same pattern applies. 3 tenths is going to be the same thing as 30 hundredths once I draw all these out. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's 10, 20, 30 hundredths that the 3 tenths is equivalent to. Okay, on the next one, it's 2 ones and 3 tenths. So I'm going to show 2 ones and 3 tenths on the place value chart. So here's the 3 tenths. Here are the 2 ones. And it wants to know how many tenths that is total. Well, we have to break those ones into tenths, and we know that a whole is 10 tenths, just like I'm showing here. So when I do that, I get 10, 20, and then those 3 extra, so it'd be 23 tenths. We're going to do the same thing for 3 tenths and 3 hundredths. We want to know how many hundredths it is, so I'm going to draw my 3 hundredths over here. And my 3 tenths, which we're going to change into hundredths, and we know that 1 tenth is 10 hundredths, so it's going to be the same thing. Six, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have 10, 20, 30 hundredths plus those 3 that I had to start with, so it's 33 hundredths. Okay, on this next section, we're going to decompose each unit into tenths. So here we have 1 tenth, or 1, and we want to know how many tenths, so it should be equal to 10 tenths. I wrote a 1 there, and I'm recording the voiceover later, so that should be 1 equal 10 tenths. 2 would be equal to 20 tenths, because that's 2 holes. 1.3 is the same thing as saying 1 3/10. And when I change that into a fraction greater than 1, I get 13/10. So I should get 13/10 here. 2.6 will be 2 6/10, which is the same thing as 26/10. 10.3 would be 10 3/10, which would be the same if I turn into a fraction greater than 1 as 103/10. And 20.6 would be the same thing as 20 6/10, which would be 206/10 as a fraction greater than 1. Number 4 says decompose the units into hundredths. So we have 1 is equal to how many hundredths? Well, a whole is going to be 100 hundredths. So we should get 100 hundredths. 2, likewise, would be 200 hundredths, because 2 is the same as 200 hundredths here, because I could pull out 2 wholes. 1.3 would be the same as 1 3/10 or 30 hundredths. And when I change it into a mix or a fraction greater than 1, I get 13/10, which is equivalent to 130 hundredths. So I should get 130 hundredths here. Same thing on 2.6. When I get 2.6, it's going to be 2 6/10, which is 26/10, and when you multiply it by 10, you get 260 hundredths. If you check at the top and what we're doing now, it's like we're adding one more 0 to the end. 10.3 would be the same thing as 10 3/10, which is 103/10, which when we multiply it by 10 to get hundredths would be 1,030 hundredths. On part F, we have 20.6, which is 20 6/10, which would be 206/10, and when we multiply it by 10 to get hundredths, we would get 2,060 hundredths. Okay, on this last part, we're filling out the table where we turn the decimal into a mixed number and then say what it is in tenths and hundredths. They've done the first one for us. So we're going to start off with 5.3. We want to write it as a mixed number here. So for 5.3, we're going to write 5 3/10. And when they ask us how many tenths that is, just like we were doing earlier, or let's go down the line. So we'll say 9 7/10 for the second one, 10 9/10 for the third one, and 68 5/10 for the last one. Just changing those decimals to fractions. And then we'll do the tenths. So 5 3/10 would be the same thing when I turn it into a fraction greater than 1, would be 53/10. Which would be 53 over 10. 9 7/10 would be 97/10, which would be 97 over 10. 10 9/10 would be 109/10, which would be 109 over 10. And 68 5/10 would be 685/10, which would be 685 over 10. Now the same principle applies on the hundredths, but because we're going one more place over, we're multiplying it by 10, which means we'll just add a 0 onto the end of these numbers. How with like 41, we added a 0 to get 410 hundredths. So here this would be 530 hundredths, which would be 530 over 100. Here we get 970 hundredths. Which would be 970 over 100. Next, we'd get 1,090 hundredths. Which would be 1,090 over 100. And then lastly, we'll have 6,850 hundredths, which would be 6,850 over 100. If you have questions, let me know.